Alright guys, so today we're continuing this 30-day challenge with another video, and I wanted to talk today about how to be productive as an ENFP. I think that there's a lot of tips on the internet about maximize your day and how you can do the most with the least amount of time and manage your energy and yada yada. And that's all good and fine, but you know, I know from my personal experience and many ENFPs' personal experience that they don't really work. And on top of that, we have all this shame already about maybe not being the most productive individual, for better or for worse, whether that's true or not. We really struggle with the correct mindset to have all of this. So today, I'm going to explain to you how I have mastered the art of being productive somewhat to the best of my ability. And I think that the result that you should seek as an ENFP is that you should feel proud of what you've accomplished by the end of the day. That's the main thing I think that a lot of us forget to focus on. We can catastrophize a lot when we don't get as much done as we should have or that we thought. And sometimes when we even do hit the mark, we still don't feel good enough. So I want to talk about my top tips for how to alleviate that. And so you can then feel more confident about yourself, your abilities, and that will lead to more momentum for you getting your stuff done. All right, so the first tip I have is to always remember that you are prioritizing something. So I actually got this tip from multiple STP coaches, and I think that to parallel, let's dig into how introverted feeling works in ENFP. So for many of us, when people say that oh, I didn't really feel anything when this traumatizing thing happened to me, we know that that is not literally true. Everyone is always feeling something about something. So we call bullshit when some people are just hey, I don't really have that many feelings, yada yada. Because even if they're not consciously experienced, you are always feeling something. This is what ENFPs know. Your emotional world is very complex, and when people underestimate or undercut their emotional world, it really drives us bonkers. So in a similar vein, I want to say that you have to remember anytime, no matter if you're doing work or not doing work, that you're always prioritizing something. You are always logically using your brain to figure out what you want to focus on and figure out what is the most important thing to you. Now, we're going to bring in this commonly explained principle these days that no one is actually lazy. Often, if we aren't doing what our brain tells us we definitely should be doing, it's coming from an emotional place. So in a similar vein, if you feel like you aren't prioritizing the correct thing, it could be that there is some emotional need that you have not been meeting consistently, and it needs to be addressed. Now, I know that you're probably thinking, wait, but I have FI, so I am always focusing on this inner archive of emotions and tending to them and validating them and trying to pay attention to them. So how could you say that I'm not emotionally validating myself enough and that's why I'm not getting things done? So my next thing I want to explain is that there are two kinds of validation. There is the validation of introverted feeling, which is probably what you lean towards, which is telling yourself, oh, I love myself, there's only one of me, it's okay that I exist on this earth as an individual, and even if no one understands me, I understand me. There's that. And then there's the other respect, which is anyone who is me would do things this way. And anyone who's trying to get done what I'm getting done in life would do it this way. It's having faith in your logic. It's having faith that you aren't an inherently lazy individual. Now, I think that a lot of us can validate that we are good people, that we are really sweet, that we always have good intentions, that we're really talented at writing or drawing or something. But I don't think we always self-trust enough our work ethic or things about our ability to master things that aren't necessarily in the abstract emotional realm. And that's okay, but I think the key here is to ask yourself very honestly, what am I prioritizing lately that is taking the place of the thing that I should be prioritizing instead? I think that a lot of ENFPs get kind of caught up in beating themselves up and feel like their worth is tied to whether or not they get that thing done, as opposed to potentially rationalizing and understanding how you're not getting things done. And that's okay. On some level, I know that like if there's a deadline looming, it's like not okay by the external world standards. But I think that understanding and validating the realness of the logic that led you there by understanding what you were prioritizing and that is entirely subjective to you is the best way to then course correct. So now that we've established that you are always prioritizing something, we have to figure out how to move the dial to get you to prioritize the thing that you actually want to prioritize. I think the biggest thing is to unpack what about that thing is fundamentally so either triggering, invalidating, or overly intimidating. I'll give you an example. So, I've been trying to get my pantry organized for so long. Like, I literally did not do it for the longest time. I didn't go through and document what I have in my pantry, even though it was actually cutting into my finances. I was eating out a lot because I didn't know what I had at home that I could cook. So it was a chain effect. Now, in my head, I knew that I should be doing that. I should be going into my pantry, making the time, and figuring out what I have. But I just could not get myself to do it. And I finally had to be honest about what am I prioritizing when I should be doing this pantry organization. And the reality was that I was actually prioritizing other aspects of my emotional health and avoiding this trigger of all the shame and guilt of potentially throwing out expired food when I already feel guilty all the time that I am bad at honoring my body and my physical health. So by that vein, it was compounding and growing and really not like doing me any favors. I had to be honest that I'm prioritizing feeling good and feeling safe and not acknowledging the problem that not looking at my pantry has created. And this is my priority over doing what I know will get me somewhere in the long run. And once I came to this conclusion, I at the very least released the tension around the shame of like, if I don't do this, then I'm a bad person. Because once I started, doing the pantry organization, I still heard that inner critic of like, why didn't you do it earlier? You are so lazy, blah, blah, blah. But I clung on to and rooted myself in the idea that I'm always prioritizing something. And I was prioritizing like my emotional health in a way that I knew best, because anyone who's gone through the life journey I have would have thought and made similar decisions. I've heard a lot from productivity coaches that you should break down tasks to littler ones if it's one big task and it's overwhelming you. But I would suggest, if you're an ENFP, to do an additional step as to unpack what your attachment to any sort of identity revolving around this situation you might have. I think that your identity can be very rooted in not doing the thing, and I'm sure that many of you have heard this before, but I do think unpacking what identity would I be leaving behind if I do this thing is super important. Now, I personally, on top of not believing in laziness, don't believe in self-sabotage. I don't believe that anyone is ever intentionally trying to do something bad to themselves. And I also don't believe that it's anyone's place to comment on if you are self-sabotaging. This is because I believe there are many routes to success, and there are many routes that can get you back on the road to whatever it is that you are actually trying to get done with your life, with your purpose. So shake off any ideas around I'm a self-sabotager, because you're not. And instead, I would implore you to think of it more as the unfamiliar is going to be very difficult for me to navigate. This is pretty true of most people, but I think especially for an ENFP, because we operate on inferior SI, introverted sensing, and we're always seeking some sort of stability and comfort and bottom line within all of the ideating, within all of the powerful ideas, all of that. we're going to get ourselves into a rut so much more if we don't have a bottom line of stability and comfort and familiarity. And we tend to find familiarity, therefore, in our problems. So, it's important to unpack that there is something fundamentally scary about what reality you would be stepping into if you did the thing that you are supposed to. It's an undercurrent of everything you're doing, in fact. So I would ask yourself, what identity am I currently already nested in, and how does that dictate what my future could be, and what is the identity that I might want to, but is still unfamiliar and scary, step into, that doing this work or this task that I can't get myself to would give me. I think it's really important to look at it from this perspective, because then it's less about, oh, like, I'm just lazy, or potentially making excuses for yourself, and it's more about being productive about and realistic about how your brain works. Your comfort zone as an ENFP is going to be very particularly shaped based on your experiences. No one can take that from you, and the only person with any authority to actually get yourself out of that rut is you. Instead of relying on sheer willpower and just do it messaging, I would strongly suggest you let yourself make it super complex, because it is complex. In fact, the emotional intuitive bodies are as intricate and complex as the physical ones. There's like this whole network of different limiting beliefs that you have amassed against the thing that you are doing. And chances are you probably have a lot of productivity trauma from years of listening to too much, just do it with brute force, when you weren't designed to be a brute forcer. So don't make yourself that. Get really smart about identifying what identities and mental blocks you have before you go and do something so irresponsible, to be quite frank, as just making yourself do it. It'd be like if you didn't have the strength to lift something and you kept forcing yourself to do it, and then you were like experiencing all sorts of muscle pains. This is why athletes get like major life-threatening injuries that lead to them never being able to do the sport they love again, because they're not taking care of their bodies. Similarly, you cannot operate from brute force alone. You have to be really smart about it. So ask yourself what identity you are trying to adopt, but that might be a little invalidating to your previous one. And forgive yourself, because it's not an act of weakness to be honest that things are unfamiliar when you're an ENFP, and you do not always like that. When it comes to the stories and the traumas that you've had throughout your life, they're familiar because that's your way of coping with the fact that they are so destructive. Humans don't always seek what's beneficial or novel. We seek what's going to make us feel safe. And if you don't feel safe doing your work, you are not going to want to do it. So the important part is to validate that part of you, because that's one step closer to getting yourself out of that shame, I should feel safe but I don't, sort of like personal hell you've constructed. Now, a lot of this sounds probably very psychological, and it's true. I think productivity is the most ultimate sort of psychological sport. You really have to game your own perception and hack your own perception to get the willpower to do just about anything. And so an important part is to recognize that just as how you can't rely on lifting the same like amount of weight when you first begin to treat your body like it has muscles, because unless you're like a pro athlete or like a trainer or like someone who goes to the gym regularly, you don't really understand the science of how your body works. Similarly, a lot of us aren't used to viewing productivity as a muscle. And so we're gonna have to get used to the ebbs and flows of not the same ways of convincing ourselves to do things are going to work. My philosophy is that you have to have a strong emotional muscle, actually, for productivity. It's not about who's more disciplined. It's more about who has managed their emotions, for better or for worse in some way, to not get in the way when you're doing things. Chances are, if you're an NF, you probably get distracted really easily by emotional situations. Whether you're, say, an NFJ of some sort, and it's other people's problems or the state of the world, or as an NFP, if you feel just really personally affected and you're trying to not be by some situation that's happening in your life, you probably do not know how to not get distracted. So the important part is to give yourself room, no matter what mood you're in. literally tell yourself that you need a space every day to be able to process things. And then you get to look forward to that time in your day. Even if you work a 9 to 5, if you can devote some time, maybe get up earlier in the morning or have it be later in the day, if you can find some time to actually devote yourself to honoring and processing those emotions, and maybe even having a journal on hand to write down some wayward thoughts while you're going about your day being unable to process those emotions, it's important to give space to those. Like, if you're grieving something, whether it's like a physical person's death, or even just like a relationship gone wrong, or even just moving to a new city and the toll it's taking on your body, you need room and time to honor those emotions. At the end of the day, we underestimate how much emotions drive us. And I think that productivity is kind of the breaks in between of emotions when you have the time to actually do stuff that you don't want to. And I think that if you have not managed your emotions and you've been squashing them down with some just do it mantra, then those emotions are going to come back and haunt you. For me, at least, I feel like I have a good handle on my productivity, and despite being a very emotional, tumultuous person, I do get a lot done because I'm disciplined in that I always find time to give space to those emotions. And while I guess I could have gotten a better corporate job and made more money by now, everyone I know who's rich has a terrible mental health. I have probably better mental health than a lot of people who are my age and have so much going on that like similar to me is really overwhelming at times. So I know that this has worked out for me, and I am a nerd when it comes to productivity, in the sense that like I have tried to get to know different ways to make myself work smarter and better over the years. I have never had a problem delivering results, but there have been pain points of my consistency that, drive me crazy. And so I'm curating the best strategies that have worked for me as an ENFP who is running their own business and works 2 other virtual assistant jobs to supplement my income. And with all of that, I am living in LA and I'm trying to learn how to budget better, but in terms of like actually getting the day-to-day tasks done, I am pretty successful at that. I think validating your logic as an ENFP is really difficult, but really necessary, because chances are when you're procrastinating, you are overly identifying with the part of you that you don't think is good enough. There's plenty parts of you that you do probably think are good enough, but when it comes to like working and being logical and all that stuff, you wouldn't even be watching this video if you didn't know you had a problem. So I would implore you to really dig into yourself and just literally take it as a given that you're always prioritizing something. Just take my word for it. Don't be like, maybe I'm not always prioritizing something, because just as surely as you believe in emotional foundations that everyone's always feeling something, anyone with introverted thinking TI will tell you that everyone's always thinking something. Even if you've been gaslit by people that ask you and then you can't explain, so they assume you're thinking nothing, don't listen to those voices anymore, because that's not true. Because I have verifiably gone out and found TPs to tell you that you are always prioritizing something. This is a fundamental tenet of how people follow those logical progressions that probably confuse the shit out of you. So just take my word for it. I think another big thing I want to really push for ENFPs who want to be productive is to really choose which shit sandwich you want to eat. And I'm going to make a whole separate video about this, but the shit sandwich concept was coined by my favorite ENTJ author, Mark Manson. He spoke about how when you have a passion for something, you have to be willing to think of it from the costs perspective as opposed to the benefits perspective. So basically this means that if you are working a job that you love but it's costing you, you have to then rank how this cost compares to other costs. And even if it's a job that you're getting tired of, you have to also do the same thing where you're looking at the cost relative to other costs. So, for example, I'm working for myself and I'm doing my spiritual coach, facilitator, tarot reader thing. And I'm not making as much money as I would like to at this point in my life. And sometimes it's easy to sink into feelings of despair when I compare myself to my other friends' fat savings account. But then when I think about the cost of what they're paying implicitly in order to have that fat savings account compared to the cost I'm paying, Which one would I rather? It requires you to go through different scenarios and think about it more critically. A lot of my friends who are in 9 to 5s, they have other, quote, expenses that I don't. Like, I really do not have depressive episodes anymore, and I used to a lot. I have the freedom to set my own hours so I can manage my body and my sleep schedule way better. And I'm also more engaged with more different kinds of people that support me, and I have time to actually catch up with them throughout the day. It's like a lot of flexibility that a lot of these 9 to 5s don't have. I remember being very trapped and just feeling just all sorts of ups and downs when I was in the journalism industry. And while I don't think it's quite accurate to write off that I'm just not a 9 to 5 person, I certainly do not think that the 9 to 5 that I went to school with the intention of eventually having was for me. And so I'm willing to say that the cost of what I'm shouldering and the cost of what my friends are shouldering for that benefit of getting that higher income level, I'm not willing to pay their costs. I'm willing to pay my costs. So in this vein, I think it's really motivating to me because whenever I lose sight of my why, I can come back to my would rather. So I would really implore you to think about what would you rather. Because if your job really does suck that much and you don't like doing the tasks, consider the costs that are kind of eating at you, and then consider the costs of like another job. Like if you just went and became a barista and worked on some other side project, what would that cost you and what are you willing to pay for that? I think that this can really help you remember your priorities. Going back to what I said earlier, yes, we always are prioritizing something, but I think when you're an ENFP and you have TI polar, you don't remember what you're prioritizing. So this is a great way to get really clear on that. I also think a good step is to automate your work so it feels like autopilot. So think of it as simply as you can. Write out the steps for doing the tasks you want and then tell yourself it's simple. Go, all I have to do is do XYZ to do XYZ and then XYZ. If you simplify how many things that you have to pay attention to, it gets a lot easier to get into a flow. I used to be really bad at driving, and now I can drive in the city of Los Angeles without fearing for my life ever. And this is coming from someone who failed the license test 3 times. And for me, it came down to I got better at driving when I realized there's only a few possibilities of things that could happen that would endanger me compared to other things. And I only have to pay attention to those select things. So now I know mentally that when I'm in that seat, I will be looking at this very specific part in my mirror. That's my blind spot. I'm not going to be looking anywhere else at all the other cars around me. I'm just going to be looking right there. And on command I go, is there a car? Yes, no, no, I can merge. If I complicate it by focusing on anything else, it's really going to bog me down. Now, I know that this idea is very difficult for a lot of ENFPs to take on, so I would encourage you to write it down and keep it simple. And don't be too ambitious and just focus on a certain logical area of your life to automate things for. Maybe it's like, okay, my boss asked me to do this thing. What are the actual steps to doing that? And then be realistic that he's not asking for anything more than this. And if you don't know, just ask, I guess. But in general, it's important to make things as simple and on command as possible. When push comes to shove, we can use SI to really get things going and moving and work faster than most people. But if we're not maximizing that by cutting the fat from our process of overthinking, if you don't have it step by step outlined in your brain because you're not familiar with the rhythm of doing that thing, it's not going to feel natural to you. Any habit that I've built up has been from me cutting the fat and just being like, okay, if I want to cook, oil, sauce, bam. There's all these foundational ways to think about what you're doing as simply as possible to where it feels like muscle memory. This is how we acquire muscle memory about so many things in general. There's foundational bottom lines for them. And again, going back to what I said about how we need stability on some level, that's really important too. My last tip for being productive as an ENFP is to frequently forgive yourself for not having figured this stuff out sooner. Especially if you had an SFJ parent, which I'm making this generalization because a lot of us have somehow had it from my years of observing the type community. or maybe not an SFJ, maybe an STJ. Either way, if anyone ever held against you, why didn't you do this sooner? And that's the thing that you tell yourself over and over again when you don't do things. Fuck that. As a good friend of mine said, it's way more important how you respond to the present than getting caught up in the past. I would frequently validate yourself and forgive yourself and practice remembering that life comes in seasons, and there's maybe a really long winter. Maybe it lasted years and years, but there can always be a spring and summer at any time, because the flow of things is we give and we take, we give and we take, we get and we give, we get, we give. There's just a lot of ways life flows. And I think letting yourself know that it is totally normal to feel like a fuck up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a fuck up, is the best way to be productive. Now, at the core of this, I would also suggest talking to a therapist in general if you don't already have one. Because if you go to therapy to manage your emotions, you will get better at being productive. My emotional health going up has directly correlated to my productivity going up as well. And yes, I've always been good at meeting deadlines, but like I never felt great about it until now. And when it came to like things in my life that I have procrastinated my entire life on, such as organizing my clothes and like organizing my cooking routine and all of these things, until I got my emotional health down and really learned to validate myself on this logical level, I could not take action in the physical world on those things. So if you're an ENFP in search of productivity help, I suggest actually going towards the life coaching realm first before you try all these hacks like the Pomodoro, whatever. You need to accept that even if you're like a neurotypical ENFP, you're still going to have to experience life in a different way than a lot of people in the workforce. And even then, these tips don't always work for other people, non-ENFPs in the workforce. So give up on the idea that there's something wrong with you. There's just something different about you. And you'll have to unlock that for yourself before you ever feel happy with your productivity. I really did not think for a long time that I would be as happy as I am with my productivity and my work ethic and my ability to do hard things and eat shit. But I've risen to the occasion way more than I could have ever believed was possible, because I have prioritized my emotions first and foremost, to where like they're like what's helping me get things done. So view that as the way to do things. If you reach the end of this video and you're kind of like, what the heck? Okay, but like I'm very neurodivergent, so a lot of this didn't apply to me. I really do hope that at the very least, your biggest takeaway is that you deserve validation. You deserve to not look at yourself as flawed or like something is wrong. Because if you can learn to find communities that validate you without thinking that validation is for the weak, you will skyrocket in terms of productivity relative to where you are now. And even if it doesn't quite meet your standards, you'll feel better while doing it. So yeah, thank you for coming to this video. If you liked it, please feel free to subscribe and leave a comment. I'm really excited to make more of these videos about self-help tips for all types, but I'm starting with the ENFPs because I know that we really need a lot of validation, and I'll be the first to give it out. So yeah, have a nice day everyone, and hope to talk to you soon.